The storm had arrived without warning, dark clouds swallowing the horizon and the wind slicing across the hills like a living blade. Ilara ran, her skirts whipping around her legs, mud sucking at her boots, and her breath coming in ragged gasps. She had been traveling along the ridges to escape the confines of her father's estate, seeking freedom in the wilds, but she had underestimated nature's wrath. Now, drenched and trembling, she realized the forest offered little shelter. Every tree shuddered under the storm's force, and lightning illuminated strange shadows that made her heart leap in fear. Through the haze of rain, she spotted a flicker of movement. A cave nestled into the side of a cliff. Its mouth was dark, almost forbidding, but it promised refuge from the storm. With a mix of desperation and hope, she scrambled toward it, her fingers clawing at the slick rocks. She barely noticed the figure that moved like a shadow inside the cave until she was nearly upon him. He emerged slowly, tall and imposing, his presence both terrifying and magnetic. Kanoa, an Apache warrior known in whispers for his skill and unyielding spirit, stood with a bow slung across his broad shoulders. His eyes, dark and unflinching, assessed her like a hawk sizing up prey. Yet there was no immediate hostility, only a cautious curiosity. The rain traced rivulets down his weathered face, making him look almost otherworldly. Like a spirit of the storm itself, Ilara froze, instinctively aware that she was intruding on a world she did not understand. She had heard stories of Apache warriors, tales filled with both admiration and fear, and suddenly those stories became terrifyingly real. I didn't mean to intrude," she stammered, her voice nearly drowned by the wind. "Please, I only seek shelter from the storm." Kanoa's gaze softened ever so slightly, though his posture remained rigid, every muscle coiled and alert. He did not speak immediately. Words were not the first language of someone who lived by instinct and survival. Instead, he gestured for her to step inside. It was a subtle command, a test of her courage as much as her manners. Ilara hesitated, then edged forward, the cave's darkness swallowing her small form. Inside, the storm's fury was muted to distant rumblings, but the air smelled of earth and smoke from a small fire Kanoa had already built. He had been hunting nearby when the storm caught him, and the fire's warmth illuminated the sharp lines of his face, the angles that spoke of countless battles and long days spent in the sun. Ilara couldn't tear her eyes away. There was something compelling about him, something both terrifying and magnetic. "Thank you," she said, her voice steadier now, though still tinged with awe. "I didn't know I'd find anyone like you." Her words hung in the air, a mixture of flattery and innocence, and she could feel the dangerous tension in his presence like a taut string ready to snap. Kanoa studied her, and for the first time, he felt the strange pull that often haunted his dreams. She was fragile, yes, but there was a fire in her eyes, a spark that mirrored the untamed wilderness around them. She was fearless enough to approach him, yet cautious enough to respect the invisible boundaries that separated their worlds. He felt his heart beat in an unfamiliar rhythm, a pulse that demanded attention yet warned restraint. The storm outside raged on, rain hammering the cave's entrance, wind moaning through the cliffs, and lightning painting the darkness in fleeting bursts of white. Inside, in that small, firelit space, two worlds collided, hers, delicate and refined, his wild and disciplined. Neither spoke further, yet the silence was alive, charged with the dangerous thrill of something neither fully understood. It was a forbidden encounter, a crossing of paths that should perhaps never have happened, yet here it was, inevitable as the storm itself. Ilara's fingers nervously twisted the hem of her soaked dress. She could sense the power radiating from Kanoa, an invisible barrier that warned her to tread carefully. Yet she could not stop the curiosity and fascination that surged within her. She was drawn to him, irresistibly, dangerously, like a moth to a flame. And Kanoa, though his mind urged caution, and his heart screamed restraint, found himself captivated by the woman who dared to step into his world. Uninvited but unafraid. Neither spoke, but both understood. Something had shifted in that cave. Something that neither the storm nor time could undo. The fire flickered, casting shadows across Kanoa's face, revealing angles and lines she could never have imagined in a man so enigmatic. Elara felt an ache in her chest, a magnetic pull that seemed to reach through the distance he kept between them. She knew she was treading dangerous ground. He was a warrior, untamed and bound to a life she could scarcely comprehend. But the urgency of her emotions overpowered caution. She stepped closer, her wet dress clinging to her form, and met his piercing gaze. His eyes, dark as the midnight sky, studied her with a mixture of curiosity, suspicion, and a dangerous restraint that made her pulse quicken. Every instinct told her to retreat, yet her heart propelled her forward, driven by something she could neither name nor control. Kanoa. She began, her voice trembling. She took another step and then another, closing the small distance between them. I know I am an outsider. I know you do not trust me, and perhaps you never will. But I cannot leave without saying what I feel. Her words quivered, raw and honest, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something in him that no one else had ever seen, a hint of vulnerability beneath the armor of his stoicism. She paused, gathering the courage that had brought her this far, and finally whispered words that seemed almost foolish in their audacity. Love me, Kanoa. I can be yours, if you let me. The effect on him was immediate and visceral. His heart, long restrained by duty, honor, and a fear of attachment, suddenly pounded in his chest. He stepped back instinctively, as if distance could shield him from the force of her words. Every fiber of his being screamed both warning and desire. He had encountered temptation before, but never like this, never with someone who dared to confront him so openly, so recklessly. Elara saw the tension ripple across his body, the subtle tightening of his jaw, the way his hands flexed at his sides. She could almost feel the storm inside him, mirroring the one raging outside the cave. And yet, she refused to retreat. She reached out, her fingers brushing the edge of his cloak, a tentative gesture meant to bridge the chasm between them. I know it is foolish, she admitted softly, her voice breaking slightly. I know you have your life, your people, your code. But I cannot keep this inside. I cannot leave without telling you. Please, see me. Not as an outsider. Not as someone weak. See me as someone who could stand with you for you. Kanoa's chest heaved, his pulse loud in the quiet cave. He wanted to respond, to reach for her, to close the distance and let the heat of desire overtake reason, but he could not. His life had been shaped by the wilderness, by survival, by the unyielding principles of his people. To give in was to risk everything he had built, to invite chaos into a carefully ordered existence. And yet, his heart betrayed him, pounding in a way that he could not ignore. You do not understand, he said finally, his voice low, rough with emotion he did not usually show. I am not free. Not truly. I am bound by more than you can know. Your words, they honor me, yet they put me in danger, and you as well. Elara swallowed hard, sensing both the warning and the longing beneath his words. She stepped closer again, undeterred. Then let me face that danger with you, she whispered, almost desperately. I am not afraid of what comes. I only ask, do not turn away. Do not let me go without knowing that maybe you could feel something for me, even if it is forbiddance. For a long moment, Kanoa said nothing. The firelight danced in his dark eyes, reflecting the storm that raged both outside and within. He could feel the truth of her words, the courage it took to speak them, and the undeniable pull that threatened to shatter the walls around his heart. And yet, he could not answer fully. To give in was both terrifying and irresistible. Instead, he did the only thing he could in that moment. He withdrew. He stepped back, creating distance between them, and shook his head. "I cannot." "Not now," he said, the restraint in his voice palpable. "Not until I know that the world allows it, and that it does not destroy us both." Ilara's eyes filled with a mix of heartbreak and determination. She understood his restraint, but she refused to let it extinguish the fire that had been ignited. Somewhere deep inside, she knew this was only the beginning, a dangerous, forbidden beginning, where desire and honor collided in ways neither of them could predict. And in that charged silence, the storm outside seemed to echo the storm within, relentless, powerful, and unstoppable. After Ilara's words, the cave felt smaller, tighter, as if the air itself held its breath. Kanoa stood motionless, his eyes fixed on the fire that flickered between them. Yet his mind was a storm fiercer than the one outside. He had faced countless battles, braved unforgiving landscapes, and survived ambush meant to end his life. But nothing had ever unsettled him like the bold vulnerability of this woman, who dared to plead for his heart. He ran a hand across his face, brushing away the rain-soaked strands of hair that clung to his skin. His pulse still thundered in his ears, betraying the calm he tried so desperately to maintain. Kanoa's life was built on rules that had been etched into him since boyhood: honor to his people, loyalty to his tribe, and an unyielding discipline that demanded detachment from distractions, especially from emotions that could weaken him. Love was a danger, an unpredictable force that could undo a warrior in a single heartbeat. And yet, here it was, reaching out to him with a force he could not resist. He moved toward the cave's entrance, the wind whipping his cloak around him, and looked out at the rain-lashed landscape. The storm mirrored his turmoil, relentless, unrestrained, chaotic. He inhaled the scent of wet earth and pine, grounding himself in the tangible world, trying to push back the invisible pull toward her. The truth was undeniable. He wanted her, perhaps more than he had ever wanted anything, but desire was a luxury he could not afford. Kanoa's heart ached, a strange, unfamiliar sensation that both frightened and exhilarated him. He had always prided himself on his control, yet Ilara's courage, her beauty, and her sheer audacity had pierced through his carefully constructed walls. He thought of her out there, drenched and shivering, yet standing before him with a bravery he could not ignore. Her eyes had held hope, defiance, and longing all at once, and the memory of that gaze now haunted him. He turned back to the fire, watching the flames dance in unpredictable patterns, and realized with a start that he was imagining her there beside him. Her warmth, her scent, her voice, all of it imprinted itself on him with the intensity of a dream he could not wake from. He clenched his fists, trying to banish the thought, yet it lingered stubbornly, as persistent and insistent as the storm outside. Duty and desire collided violently within him. If he allowed himself to succumb, he risked not only his safety but hers as well. The world outside was dangerous, filled with rival tribes and settlers who would exploit any weakness. And yet, to deny her, to retreat fully into the protective walls he had built, seemed equally unbearable. He felt torn between two truths: the necessity of restraint and the undeniable reality of what his heart demanded. Kanoa's breath came in slow, controlled rhythms, each exhale an attempt to quell the rising tide of emotion. He forced himself to step away from the fire, to remind himself that this was not the time for recklessness. He could not allow himself to be vulnerable, not when the consequences could be so dire. Yet every time he looked at her, standing there, soaked and trembling but defiant, he felt the pull anew. as though some invisible thread tied them together, unbreakable despite his best intentions. Finally, he turned fully to her, his expression hard, masking the tumult beneath. "Elara," he said, his voice low and measured, carrying a weight that both warned and longed, "you do not understand the life I lead. I am bound by responsibilities you cannot see, by a world you cannot step into without losing yourself. To open my heart, it is not just dangerous, it could destroy us both." Elara's eyes searched his, unflinching, though she saw the truth behind his words. She understood the warning, yet refused to let it extinguish her hope. "Then let me face that danger with you," she whispered, a tremor of defiance in her voice. "I will not turn away. I will not flee. I only ask, give me a chance." Kanoa looked away, the firelight reflecting in his dark eyes, revealing a fleeting vulnerability that he did not intend to show. His heart pounded, torn between the life he had always known and the possibility she represented. He wanted to reach for her, to close the distance that separated them, but he could not. Instead, he did the only thing that seemed possible. He withdrew further. A step back, an almost imperceptible wall of space, both physical and emotional. "I cannot," he said finally, the words heavy with regret and longing. "Not yet. You have awakened something in me, something I am not ready to confront." Elara remained silent, her resolve undiminished. She understood the weight of his withdrawal, the invisible chains of duty and fear. Yet a spark had been lit, a spark that neither of them could ignore. And in that charged silence, Kanoa felt the depth of the bond forming between them, a connection as dangerous as it was irresistible. Outside, the storm raged on, indifferent to the struggles of human hearts. Inside the cave, two souls hovered on the precipice of something forbidden, their desires clashing with the realities that bound them. Yet neither willing to let the other go. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving the hills drenched and shimmering under a fragile sun. Mist clung to the trees, and the air smelled of wet earth and pine. Galara stepped outside the cave, boots sinking slightly into the mud, and surveyed the rugged landscape. Every hill and ravine spoke of a world untamed and harsh, a world that belonged to Kanoa, and one she had never truly imagined inhabiting. Kanoa emerged behind her, silent as always, a shadow among shadows. He observed her carefully, as though the morning light had revealed something he had not anticipated, her resolve. She was not like other women who had passed through his life, delicate, sheltered, and fearful. She was soaked, muddy, and unafraid. The audacity she had shown the night before had not faded. If anything, it seemed to burn brighter in the pale daylight. "You do not belong here," he said, his voice low, carrying both warning and a hint of disbelief. "This land is not meant for someone like you." Elara met his gaze, unflinching. "Then teach me," she said simply. "Teach me to survive here. I will learn. I will prove I can." Kanoa's lips pressed into a thin line. He had faced countless challenges, yet the thought of guiding someone from a sheltered world into the brutal realities of his own made his chest tighten. To survive the wilderness, one had to move silently, strike decisively, read the land and the animals as if they were extensions of the self. He could train warriors and hunters, but could he train someone like her? More importantly, could he trust her with the knowledge that came with survival, the knowledge of life and death? He decided to test her. "Then follow me," he said finally. Without waiting for a response, he began down the narrow trail that led through the forested hills. Elara hesitated for only a moment before following, her wet clothes clinging to her, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. The forest tested her immediately. Roots twisted across the paths, rocks were slick with rain, and every step demanded balance and careful attention. Kanoa moved ahead effortlessly, a ghost among the trees, yet he kept glancing back, watching her progress. Alara stumbled more than once, scraped her hands on wet bark, and cursed under her breath, but each time she regained her footing. Driven by determination rather than skill, hours passed as they climbed ridges and forded streams. The sun rose higher, illuminating the sharp contrasts of this wild land. Kanoa demonstrated the silent tracking of animals, the subtle signs of weather changes, the art of moving unseen. Alara absorbed it all with fierce concentration, repeating each motion, learning each subtle cue. Yet it was not just the physical challenges that tested her, it was the clash of worlds. She was accustomed to silk dresses, polished floors, and predictable safety. Here, she faced unpredictability at every turn. The snap of a twig could signal a predator. The roar of a river could sweep her away. The sudden shadow of an eagle could mean danger or opportunity. And through it all, Kanoa's presence loomed like both protector and judge. His silent gaze reminding her that failure was not an option, despite the hardship. Alara began to find a rhythm, a connection to the land that had seemed impossible. She discovered a resilience she had never known, a courage that surprised even her. And Kanoa, ever watchful, began to notice. Her determination, her refusal to break under the weight of his world, stirred something within him, an admiration laced with desire and frustration. At midday, they paused on a ridge overlooking a valley blanketed with mist. Kanoa pointed to a distant deer grazing near the river. "See it?" he asked. "Notice how it moves, how it pauses, how it listens. To survive here, you must see everything, sense everything." Alara nodded, eyes sharp now, heart racing not just from exertion but from understanding. "I see it," she whispered. "I hear it. I understand." Kanoa's gaze lingered on her longer than necessary. For the first time, he saw more than the outsider. He saw someone who might survive, not just the wilderness, but the dangerous path he walked. And somewhere deep inside, a spark of hope flickered. Perhaps this woman, so foreign to his world, could belong here after all. The wind shifted, rustling the leaves and carrying the scent of the river below. Kanoa turned away from her gaze, unwilling to let her see the emotions that flickered across his face. But he could not deny the truth, her courage, her defiance, and her willingness to meet his world on its terms had unsettled him in ways that went beyond survival. And for the first time, he allowed himself to imagine that their world so different, so dangerous might one day intersect not in conflict, but in partnership. The day stretched on, and the lessons continued. Yet, as the sun began to lower behind the hills, Kanoa felt the undeniable pull of something he had long denied, the possibility that this outsider, this brave and relentless woman, had begun to carve a place in his heart. The tranquility of the hills was a fragile illusion. As the sun dipped behind jagged peaks, Kanoa's sharp eyes caught movement in the distant shadows among the trees, too deliberate to be animals. He froze, every muscle taut, senses straining. Alara, who had grown stronger and more confident with every passing day, sensed the sudden shift in him. "What is it?" she asked, her voice steady but cautious. "Trouble," he replied, his gaze fixed on the tree line. "Rivals or settlers?" "Possibly both." Alara felt a chill run down her spine. She had come to respect Kanoa's instincts, and now she understood that they were not mere habit. They were the difference between life and death. Yet despite the danger, there was a fire in her chest, the same fire that had pushed her to survive the wilderness. "Then we face it," she said firmly. "Together." Kanoa's eyes flicked to hers, dark and stormy, and for a moment he saw not fear but determination. The courage she displayed now, even in the face of danger, set her apart from anyone he had ever known. He wanted to keep her safe, to shelter her from the chaos, but he also knew that in this world, survival demanded action and unity. He motioned for her to follow as he moved silently through the underbrush. The shadows in the trees grew closer, shapes taking form. Armed men moving with purpose, their presence aggressive and territorial. Kanoa's lips pressed into a thin line. He knew the area, he knew how to navigate the terrain, how to turn the hills and valleys to their advantage, but he also knew that Alara, despite her growing skill, was still vulnerable. "Stay close," he whispered, his voice a low rumble. "Do exactly as I do. One mistake, and they will kill us both." Alara nodded, matching his movements as they descended into a narrow ravine. The enemy party passed above them, unaware of their presence, and Kanoa's pulse slowed slightly. Yet the danger was far from over. He needed to create a plan, a way to turn the tables on those who thought the land belonged to them. Hours passed in tense silence as Kanoa guided her through hidden paths, teaching her the subtleties of stealth and strategy. Alara followed every instruction with meticulous care, her determination unyielding. She had already proven herself capable in the wilderness. Now under fire, she proved herself capable in conflict. And Kanoa could not ignore it. Her courage was no longer a spark. It was a flame, fierce enough to match his own. When the rival group finally made camp in a clearing, Kanoa whispered instructions to her. "You will stay hidden, observe, wait for my signal." But Alara shook her head, her eyes alight with fierce resolve. "No, we do this together. You taught me to survive. Now let me help you fight." His heart pounded, torn between admiration and fear. She was right. He had underestimated her strength, but the danger was real, deadly. Yet he could not deny the surge of pride and something deeper, something he had long denied at the thought of her standing beside him. "Very well," he murmured, a reluctant edge of respect in his voice as night fell. They moved silently, shadows among shadows, circling the enemy camp. Kanoa's mind was sharp, calculating every move, every angle. Alara mirrored his focus, her hands steady and her breathing controlled. When the moment came, they struck with precision silent arrows, subtle distractions, and the careful manipulation of the terrain. The enemy, caught off guard by the skill and coordination of this unexpected pair, faltered. In the chaos, Kanoa found himself beside Alara, their movements synchronized, hearts pounding in unison. There was an unspoken understanding between them, a bond forged in danger, trust, and mutual respect. Each glance carried weight. Each coordinated action spoke of growing reliance. By dawn, the rival group had retreated, leaving the valley quiet once more. Kanoa and Alara stood together on a ridge overlooking the clearing, bodies tense, adrenaline still coursing through their veins. She turned to him, her face flushed with exertion, her eyes bright with triumph and something else, something that made his heart twist in ways he could not control. "You see?" she said softly. "I told you we could face it together." He studied her, the fierce woman who had not only survived his world, but had begun to thrive in it. His chest tightened, and for the first time, he allowed himself a fleeting thought. Perhaps she could belong here in the dangerous, untamed world he called home. Perhaps she could even belong in his heart, yet the shadows of doubt lingered. Their alliance had been born of necessity, not trust, and the world outside the hills was not done testing them. Still, for the first time, Kanoa allowed himself to imagine a future in which danger could be faced side by side, with someone who had earned his respect and perhaps, in time, something far more. The days after their victory were tense but fleetingly peaceful. Kanoa and Alara moved through the hills with practiced stealth, their bond strengthened by the shared danger. Yet peace, Kanoa knew, was always temporary in this land. The world beyond the hills was relentless, and it was not long before it reminded them of its cruelty. They had set up camp near a hidden spring, the water glinting like liquid silver in the fading afternoon light. Elara knelt at the edge, filling her canteen, while Kanoa scanned the surrounding woods. His instincts hummed with quiet tension. He sensed it before he saw it, the faint crack of a branch, the whisper of movement. Someone was watching them. "Elara," he warned, voice low and controlled. "Get back." Before she could respond, shadows emerged from the trees. A group of armed men, strangers to these hills, moved quickly, surrounding them. Elara's eyes widened as she recognized the danger, her hand flying to her dagger. But it was not enough. In the blink of an eye, one of the men lunged at her, knocking her to the ground. "No." Kanoa roared, rushing forward, but the men were skilled and numerous. He fought with precision, arrows and strikes, yet they were determined and brutal. Elara struggled against a strong arm, trying to free herself, her heart pounding with fear and anger. One of the captors grabbed her, yanking her from the ground, dragging her toward the tree line. "Leave her!" Kanoa barked, but the odds were against him. He knew that pursuit now could risk his own life or worse, hers. He chased them for a moment, arrows flying, but the men retreated into the dense forest, their knowledge of the terrain nearly matching his own. Helpless rage boiled in him, a storm more furious than any he had faced before. Elara fought, kicking and screaming, but even her newfound skills could not match the strength and numbers of her captors. As they disappeared into the trees, Kanoa felt a pull in his chest, a pain he had never experienced. Fear, anger, and helplessness collided, and for the first time, he realized how deeply she had penetrated his heart. He sank to one knee, jaw clenched, fingers tightening on the bow he held. His mind raced, calculating, planning. He would not allow her to remain in their hands. The world beyond the hills could not touch her, not while he still drew breath. His heart, which had been cautious, guarded, and disciplined, now thudded with undeniable clarity. He loved her. Every instinct screamed it. Every memory of her defiance and courage amplified it. Kanoa rose, the fire in his eyes matching the fury in his heart. "You will not take her from me," he whispered to the trees, as if the forest itself would carry the warning. He moved with calculated stealth, tracking their path, noting every broken twig, every footprint. The hunt was on, not for survival alone, but for love and vengeance entwined. As dusk settled over the hills, Kanoa finally caught sight of them near a shallow canyon. The men were distracted, arguing amongst themselves, giving him the chance he needed. He moved silently, shadow to shadow, heart pounding, mind sharp as a blade. Every step brought him closer to Elara, closer to the woman whose courage had captivated him and whose presence he could no longer deny. With precise arrows and a combination of stealth and skill, he incapacitated the captors one by one, moving like a specter through the canyon. Finally, he reached her side, pulling her free from the grasp of the last man. Elara stumbled into his arms, breathing heavily, tears mixing with the dust and sweat on her face. "You're safe," he said, his voice low, gruff, and trembling despite his effort to remain controlled. "I've got you, always." Her hands clutched his shoulders, eyes wide and searching. "Kanoa, you came for me. I will always come for you," he said, voice breaking slightly under the weight of emotion he had long denied. No one will take you from me again." For a long moment, they stood in the canyon, the danger gone but the intensity of their emotions blazing hotter than any fire. Kanoa's hands cupped her face, his eyes locking with hers, and for the first time, he let the walls around his heart crumble entirely. Every caution, every fear, every rule that had bound him seemed meaningless in the face of this truth. He could not live without her. Elara leaned into him. Her tears soaked into his chest, and he held her as if letting go would destroy him. The world around them was still dangerous, still chaotic, but in that moment, the storm inside Kanoa had found its anchor. And somewhere deep inside, he knew this was only the beginning of Ba. The night had fallen over the hills like a velvet cloak, the sky scattered with stars that shimmered over the rugged landscape. Kanoa and Alara sat by the small fire he had built, their bodies close but not touching, yet the tension between them was undeniable. The events of the day had left adrenaline coursing through their veins, but exhaustion now softened the edges of fear, leaving room only for raw, unguarded emotion. Alara's gaze lingered on Kanoa. His face, usually so stoic, bore the subtle traces of vulnerability she had never seen before. The tightness around his eyes, the clenching of his jaw, the faint quiver of his hands as he adjusted the firewood. She reached out hesitantly, placing a hand on his arm. "Kanoa," she whispered. He flinched slightly at the touch, then relaxed, his breath catching as he turned to look at her. "Alara," he said, voice low, rough with emotion. I should not. You don't have to say anything," she interrupted softly. I know the rules, the dangers. But I also know you. I see you. And I'm not afraid of what we feel." For a long moment, they simply stared at each other, the crackling fire filling the silence. Kanoa's heart pounded in a rhythm he could no longer control, his mind a storm of fear, longing, and love. He had trained himself for restraint, for survival, for the life of a warrior. But she had undone every precaution with a single plea, a single act of courage, a single unflinching gaze that said, "I am yours if you let me." He reached for her, hands trembling slightly as they cupped her face. The world outside, the danger, the rival tribes, the settlers faded into insignificance. All that mattered was the warmth of her skin under his fingertips, the steady rhythm of her breath, the undeniable pull that had drawn him to her from the very beginning. "Alara," he said, his voice breaking, I cannot promise the world will be safe. I cannot promise we will never face danger. But I can promise this. I will not turn away from you. Not now. Not ever." Tears welled in her eyes, and she pressed her forehead to his, their breaths mingling in the cool night air. "That is enough," she whispered. "That is all I need." Kanoa closed the distance, and for the first time, he allowed himself to surrender fully to what he had denied for so long. His lips met hers in a fierce, tentative kiss that spoke of relief, longing, and the culmination of every unspoken emotion between them. She responded immediately, her hands moving to his chest, feeling the strength and the vulnerability that coexisted in him. The kiss deepened, and the barriers he had built around his heart crumbled completely. Every careful wall of duty, every lesson in restraint, every thought of consequence, none of it mattered now. She was here, alive, brave, and utterly his, and he would not deny himself the fire that surged between them. They pulled back slightly, foreheads still touching, and Kanoa's dark eyes searched hers. "I feared," he began, voice rough. "I feared that to love, to let myself feel, would destroy me. And yet, to deny it feels worse. I am yours, Alara, entirely, and it terrifies me, but it is the truth I can no longer resist." Alara smiled, tears shining in the firelight. "Then we face it together," she said. "Fear and all. Danger and all. You do not have to carry it alone. The world outside could wait." In the quiet of the hills, under the shelter of the stars, they allowed themselves to be vulnerable, to feel, to surrender to the connection that had been building through storms, danger, and trials. Kanoa held her close, and for the first time in his life, he did not hide his emotions, did not withdraw, did not fight the love that consumed him. Hours passed with whispered words, gentle touches, and shared warmth. The fire burned low. casting a soft glow over two hearts that had finally found each other amid chaos. And though the dangers of the world still loomed, Kanoa and Alara knew something profound. They were no longer alone. Their bond had been tested in the fiercest storms, forged in trials that had left them bruised but unbroken, and now it was unshakable, ready to face whatever the horizon might hold. In that quiet night, surrounded by the wild hills and the memory of battles survived, Kanoa allowed himself to love and to be loved fully, without reservation, without fear. And Alara, courageous and unwavering, met him in that surrender, creating a union that neither storm nor shadow nor danger could ever undo. The first light of dawn crept over the hills, brushing the peaks with gold and setting the mist that clung to the valleys aglow. Kanoa and Alara stood at the crest of a ridge, overlooking the land that had tested them, shaped them, and bound them together. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine, wet earth, and the promise of new beginnings. After days of storms, battles, and unrelenting tension, this moment felt almost surreal, a fragile peace earned through courage, loyalty, and a love neither had anticipated. Alara's hand found Kanoa's, fingers intertwining instinctively. He looked down at her, eyes still shadowed by the intensity of their trials, yet softened by the warmth she brought to his life. They had both changed in ways the other could see and feel. She was no longer the sheltered outsider who had stumbled into his cave. She was fierce, capable, and unafraid. And he was no longer the stoic warrior who had withdrawn from every tender feeling. He was a man who had surrendered fully and willingly to the pull of his own heart. "You've changed," Kanoa said quietly, his voice low but steady, carrying both awe and affection. "You've learned this land, its dangers, its secrets, and survived it. I thought no one could do what I do, yet you've proven me wrong." Alara smiled, brushing a damp strand of hair from her face. "I survived because I had to, and because I had someone to teach me, someone who wouldn't let me fail." Her eyes met his, unwavering and sincere. "I didn't just survive for myself. I survived because of us." Kanoa's chest tightened. The simplicity of her words carried a weight that no battle had ever matched. He drew her closer, the connection between them palpable, unshakable. "We," he repeated, almost reverently, "we will face everything together from now on. Danger, storms, enemies. Nothing will come between us again." They stood in silence, letting the moment stretch, letting the hills themselves bear witness to a bond forged in fire, rain, and relentless courage. The memories of their trials, the storm that brought them together, the dangers they had faced, and the near loss that had shattered Kanoa's restraint were etched into them. They were no longer separate souls from different worlds. They were a single force, united by love and tempered by hardship. The distant hills whispered of the dangers that still lingered, rival tribes, settlers pressing into the land, the ever-present unpredictability of nature, but neither of them flinched. Where once there had been fear and hesitation, now there was trust, a deep and abiding faith in each other's strength. Kanoa tightened his grip on her hand, and she leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder. Together, they drew courage from the bond that had been tested and proven unbreakable. "I never thought I'd feel this way," Kanoa admitted, voice rough with emotion. "I never thought I could let someone in, or let myself be vulnerable. And yet, you've changed that. You've changed me, Alara." Her lips curved into a gentle, confident smile. "Then it's a good thing I don't plan on leaving." He allowed himself the faintest laugh, a sound rare and unguarded, carrying relief and joy. For the first time in his life, he did not feel the weight of solitude pressing him down. Instead, he felt the weight of promise and partnership, one he was ready to carry for as long as life allowed. Together, they began their descent from the ridge, moving through the hills with the practiced ease of warriors and lovers alike. Each step was a testament to their shared courage, every glance a silent acknowledgment of trust and desire. The world beyond might still hold danger, but they had discovered a truth stronger than fear, that love, when forged in courage and tempered in trials, could withstand anything. As the sun rose fully, illuminating the valleys and streams below, Kanoa and Alara paused once more. Their fingers intertwined, their bodies close, their hearts bound not just by desire, but by the courage and resilience that had brought them together. They knew that storms would come again, that battles might test them further, yet they were unafraid. For now and always they had each other, and in that shared glance, that silent promise, the hills themselves seemed to exhale, carrying the story of two souls who had faced danger, defied the odds, and emerged stronger, braver, and in love. Their hearts, once guarded and distant, now beat in unison, bound not by circumstance, but by choice, courage, and the undeniable power of love.